Okay, so if you were with me for my last video, you know that we went over my actual setup and how all of this works. If you were with me for the previous one, you learned about basic data types like strings, integers, and floats. Today I want to go over a more complicated data type, and that's the list data type. So I might move a little fast in this, but this is a very extensive topic, and I want to cover everything in a short amount of time. If you want, you can slow down the video. I'll also link further reading in the description about lists. I want to make it as clear as possible, but I also don't want to waste any time. In the future videos, when we do projects, you'll see lists used frequently, and you'll get a lot of practice with that. So let's get started. If you're familiar with any other programming languages, you've seen lists before in the form of arrays. So for example, in Java and C, you'd have an array of strings, of integers. So for anyone unfamiliar with programming, that's just a regular list that you'd have, just like in your daily life. So for example, a grocery list, you could have chicken, pineapple. To fit the current scenario, you gotta have toilet paper, soap, other things like that. We'll add one more, we'll do cookies. So this might be a grocery list that you'd see. Another way you could write it is like this. So I'm sure in your daily life you've seen lists written like this and lists written like this. So this is more the kind of list that we'll be looking into today. That's more how they're structured in Python. So let's get into it. Let's actually take this one out because we'll be more working with a list like this. Let's comment it out. Again, I'm sure I've talked about this before. A comment just like this, that's with a hash. Anything following a hash in Python is seen by the program as absolutely nothing. So it'll see the hash and it'll just skip to the next line because it knows that that's a comment. It's not supposed to run that line. So obviously this isn't real code. This is only for our reference. That's why we want it up there. Okay, now let's start making a list. So if we have chicken, pineapple, toilet paper, soap, and cookies in our list, what kind of data type that we already went over do you think that we'll use for each of these items? You can think about it for a second, but there's two different scenarios that we could follow. Both will involve the string data type. So again, a string is with quotes, and it's as many characters that you want in any shape or form. So we could do a string like this, and it's still a list technically, but it's not a computer list, it's a list to us. So instead, we want to break up each of these items so that the computer can digest each one of them. Say we wanted to delete one item, we'd have to go into the code and take it out manually, and that's just a pain. So, actually let me bring that back. That's pretty similar to what lists will actually look like. And now, just like we went over with other data types, variables start by giving the name, so we'll call it grocery, equal sign, and then the value. So in the past we've had strings like hello world. I always do that. Hello world. Numbers, like we could have 13, 12, floats like 1.5, anything like that. So a list is no exception. You start variable name, equal sign, and then the value. So we'll give our value like this. So this is how lists are started and ended. So you have an open bracket, open square bracket, and then a closed square bracket. And inside of here is where you're going to type your list. So I'm going to type it out and then I'll go over what each thing means. So now we have our list all typed out. And now let me explain what it does. Again, this is the name of the variable. In this case, it's a list and it's called grocery. Equal sign, so that's saying anything after this is the value. And then we have the open bracket, just like I talked about. That's how you start a list. And then you can tell we have quotes around each of these, which is interesting because in the past, let me pull one up from a previous video, you have quotes around the whole thing, right? Just like here, you have name equals John. So that's for a string. And the way that a list works is it has a bunch of different data types within it. In other programming languages, you'd see arrays where they usually have to have the same data type within it. In Python, it's a little different. We'll get into that in a minute, but in this case, we have a bunch of strings here, right? So all surrounded in quotes, so cookies, everything like that. And then you can see it's separated by commas. So it's funny because that's just like what's up here in regular English lists, where we have commas, and then you'll notice we don't have a comma at the end, just like we don't have a comma at the end in the English language. Let me take this out because we already have it up here. So now that we have our grocery list, let's print it out. So we're going to print it the same way we've printed anything else, just by saying print and then the name of the variable or the string. So in this case, it's the list, and then we're going to run the program just like we've done previously. Python 3, name of the file, which is listoverview.py. Enter, and again, we get this output. Let me make this a bit bigger for you. Let's run that one more time. Okay. So then it prints the list. So you can see this is exactly what you see down here, right? And that's simple. It's just because it's printing that. So before we get deep into operating on lists, I want to talk about just getting different items from a list. One of the really important things in programming is that computers start counting at 0. They don't start counting at 1. In lists, you'll see that when there's indexes, right? So obviously, normally you'd have up here the first index, which is chicken, and just an English list. Second, pineapple. Third, toilet paper. Fourth, soap. Fifth, cookies. It works a bit differently in programming. So instead, here the computer doesn't see this as the first index, it sees it as the 0th index, because again, computers aren't like humans, they start counting at 0. But in essence, computers start counting at 0, so you want to start counting at 0 as well. This is something that's in every single programming language that's ever existed. That is a legit language. So again, 0, 1, 2. From there, it's just counting. If we had more items, it would be 3, 4, and so on. Now, if we want to get a specific item from grocery, here's what we do. We do square brackets again, and then inside of here, we put the index number that we want. So here, let's say we want pineapple. So we can just count. This is 0, this is 1, so it's the first index. So what do we put in there? Well, we put a 1. Oops, almost knocked over my water bottle. We save that, and then if we run it, you'll see, instead of printing this whole thing, because it doesn't get that command, instead it's told to just print the first index, which again is pineapple. So let's see that in action. And there you go. It says pineapple. We can do this with anything. We can say 0, chicken, 3, oops. We'll get into that more later. 2 I meant. I even counted wrong. Look at that. Toilet paper, right? And that's how that works. If we wanted to replace chicken with something like lettuce, this is how we do that. Usually you just scribble it out on your piece of paper, or you'd erase it if you're using a pencil, and you'd write in whatever you want instead. In this case, we want lettuce. So what we do here is we say grocery, and then remember those brackets, we're calling the 0th index, right? So whatever index this is, and we're saying equals lettuce. This allows you to say grocery 0 and set it equal to something completely different. Now if we run this again, instead of printing chicken, pineapple, toilet paper, it'll print lettuce, pineapple, toilet paper. And there you go, lettuce, pineapple, toilet paper. If we did 1, I'm sure you can guess what would happen. Instead of replacing 0, it would replace 1, which is pineapple. Chicken, lettuce, toilet paper. Same exact thing with 3. Obviously, computers... Wow, I keep making that mistake. I want to say I think it's because there's a space here and it's throwing me off. Hopefully it's not just because I forget about the counting rule. So again, chicken, pineapple, lettuce. So that's consistent, just as we expected. Let's remove this. And now say you wanted to add something to a list instead. So we can do grocery, and this is going to be a bit more challenging. It's going to be a little confusing, but I'll go through it. So let me type it out first. So in this case, we're adding bananas. And now let's get into what this actually means. So grocery is the name of the list. The dot we'll get into in future videos about classes and objects, but it basically says to operate on this item, which is the list called grocery, which holds these values. And then we're appending. I'm sure you guys know the word append. I can pull up the dictionary definition. So as you can see, it means to add something or join something. And that's what we're doing here. We're joining or adding bananas to the end of the list. So when we print grocery, you'll see it'll add bananas, right? That's interesting because we don't have bananas here. So we are adding it here and that's working well. So there's one more function I want to go over with lists, and that is the pop function. So we went over replacing, we went over adding. Now you might want to know, how do you remove something? This is called the pop function. And instead of doing grocery.append, you say pop. And then you give the index number. So again, we have 0, 1, 2. Let's add a couple on to the end just for argument's sake. So here we have everything back that we had previously. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the pop function to pop off or remove one of these values. And pop takes an input of the index of the value that you want to remove. So let's choose one randomly. Let's go with toilet paper, right? Say we realize, oh, we do have toilet paper in the house. Let's remove it. Let's pop it off. So again, 0, 1, 2. So the number that we put in there is 2. First, let me show you what happens if we run this without that. So if we run this, it'll print, oh, I spelled Python wrong. So if we print this without manipulating it at all, of course, it'll just print this. So it'll print chicken, pineapple, toilet paper, soap, cookies, just like what we have here. But if we add this line back in, it should pop off 0, 1, 2. It should pop off toilet paper, and then we'll be left with just 4 items. And let's see if that worked. So there you go. Now we only have 4 items, and you can see we don't have toilet paper anymore. There's something that pop actually does where it does return the item that it pops off, but again, we'll get into that more in the future. So lists are a complicated subject. They have a lot more functions than this, but these are the main ones that operate specifically on the list. In the future, I want to get more into detail. First, I want to pick up the pace with actually learning the basics of programming, and hopefully pretty soon we can get into just doing complete projects. So as always, if you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll be sure to get to them. Any suggestions, I'd be happy to take those. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Thank you for watching and be safe. Both will involve the